the Dementia Researcher podcast, talking careers, research, conference highlights, and so much more.
Hello and welcome to the second of our Alzheimer's Association International Conference highlight shows. I'm Adam Smith, and all this week I'm joined by different researchers each day who are going to share their best bits from the day's events. With hundreds of talks and thousands of posters, these shows are far from comprehensive. However, what we hope is to provide a snapshot of what's going on for those who aren't attending and perhaps inspire those who are to check out something that they might have missed. But that's enough from me. Let's meet today's guests. I'm delighted to be joined by Sára Zsadányi and Dr. Aoife Cosgrave and Dr. Sonata Mačiulskytė. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Everybody looks so nervous for if you're watching on audio, if you're listening on audio, everybody looks a bit nervous. It'll be fine. Before we get going, let's do some introductions, and because Sára looks the least nervous of all, I'm going to go to Sára first. Why don't you introduce yourself, Sára? Tell us about yourself.
Great. Well, I'm Sára Zsadányi. I am originally from New Zealand, but currently working in Spain at the Sampa Memory Unit. And my PhD, which I'm having my first year review for on Friday, is looking at small vessel disease in Down syndrome. And I'm mostly looking at neuroimaging for this at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sára. So did you do your undergrad in New Zealand?
Yes, I did. I did my undergrad, my master's degree over there.
So that's a bit of a jump to go from New Zealand to Spain. I'm assuming you could have done it in New Zealand. What inspired you to move all the way to Spain?
I was very excited to move to Europe. It was partially motivated by love, but I have stayed now for the research part of it.
Oh, well done. We did an Ask Your Mentor podcast recently with Yvonne Couch, who told us how she moved countries as well. She followed to her PhD to follow a boy, but didn't regret it at all. She said it was worked out perfectly. So I hope following for love has done the same for you. Anyway, Aoife, why don't you go next? I moved on so quickly there, just in case. Aoife, why don't you go next?
Hi, so I haven't come from as far as New Zealand, so you might hear by my accent that I'm Irish, and I finished my PhD a few months ago, so it was working between a lab in Dublin and a lab in London, and it was looking at phytocannabinoid compounds derived from the cannabis plant to see if they had any anti-inflammatory effects in models of acute neuroinflammation, but then towards the end of my PhD, I realised I preferred to talk about my research and other people's research than doing the research. And I really wanted to stay in the neuroscience area, that field. And then a job with Alzheimer's Research UK came up, and I started working with them 3 months ago now. And I'm a science communication officer for Alzheimer's Research UK. So I'm getting the taste of it now, and I'm at a conference, but on the other side.
We should say that, shouldn't we, that Sára and Aoife, you're both actually in Amsterdam right now at the conference, and you've disappeared up to your rooms and escaped from the social stuff to very kindly join us this evening to share your highlights. So that's, Aoife, that's a big change. Oh, I am interested to know, though, you said, did cannabinoids have that? Did they work? So or are we waiting for the publication?
Waiting for the publication, IP issues, and it was a screen of a few compounds, and one in particular did show some nice effects.
Brilliant. So we should keep an eye out for that paper then. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Sonata, thank you for very patiently waiting. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, hello everybody. I have a little bit longer postdoctoral experience, not postdoctoral, but post-PhD experience. I defended my PhD almost 10 years ago. I'm staying in academia, but I'm not doing a research either. Actually, I'm from Lithuania, but I did my PhD in Finland, and I'm differently than you both. So I'm from social sciences, so it's a little bit different than the topics which I cover will be a little bit different. So what I'm doing now, to make long story short, I'm serving as a vice director for academic affairs at my university, and also I'm still keeping lecturing. I hold a position of associate professor, and with my team of teaching assistants, I'm running courses on social policy and social gerontology. And I just still dream about returning back to research one day.
But you have another job as well, don't you? That did I miss it there? But you also work with Alzheimer Europe.
It's not a job; it's volunteering. Yes, I'm a member of PPI panel, Patient Public Involvement panel, and I'm a chair of a newly established European Dementia Carers Working Group.
Fantastic. So everybody is ultimately qualified, and what I love is that we've got people working on, all three of you work in so many different fields that you've all probably attended different sessions today, which is great, because the last thing we want is you all to go to the same thing. Well, let's get on with the highlights. So Sara, I know you've been presenting this week. Why don't you tell us, before we get on to everybody else's highlights, tell us about your presentations, your posters.
So this is my first year, my very first conference, and also my very first poster.
That's brilliant, though. Come on, who can remember actually presenting at the first conference they attended to? Usually you go to a few, you get a feel for things. So you're in the first year of your PhD, you've just moved countries, and you've got two posters at the biggest conference. Well done, that's amazing.
Yes, I'm very blessed. So I am presenting my own work, which is looking at microbleeds in Down syndrome, which is a neuroimaging manifestation of small vessel disease or cerebral amyloid angiopathy. So I presented that yesterday, which was wonderful. Very great experience to have a lot of people who are actually leaders in the field come and ask me questions about my work. And then on Wednesday, I am also going to be presenting a colleague's work. She works with white matter hyperintensities. Her name is Alejandra Omaira Morcillo. And she has also been looking at a neuroimaging or a neuroradiological manifestation of small vessel disease, which is white matter hyperintensities in Down syndrome. And I'm very excited to see if I will have some more people asking questions on Wednesday.
So I'm going to put you on the spot and say, do you remember the poster numbers, so we can encourage everybody who's listening or watching to go away and check those out? Or they can just go by your name as well.
Yes, I have a very unique name. So, well, my one yesterday was number 19, but I'm afraid I do not know Alejandra's.
That's all right. If you're watching online, if you go to the platform and click on posters, it now allows you to search by surname or by first name. So if you search Sara for Sara, and then Zsadany, you'll find Sara's posters. Or poster, the first one, certainly. The other one's for your colleague. So what were the main findings from your poster?
So the main findings is that people with Down syndrome have a much higher prevalence of microbleeds. And we were also looking at some associations with different AD, Alzheimer's disease biomarkers. We were looking at some neuroimaging biomarkers, the white matter hyperintensities that I will be presenting on Wednesday, and hippocampal volumes. And I was also looking at some CSF biomarkers, and I was looking at a few cognitive tests as well. So we saw a few associations between the microbleeds. So with an increase of microbleeds, we had an increase in white matter hyperintensities, and we also had a decrease in the hippocampal volumes. So this was all very exciting for me, and I went on to do some regression analyses and found that many of the associations stuck around, but surprisingly, the white matter hyperintensities not so much. So I'm going to be very interested to carry on doing this work and also to look at the regions that microbleeds appear in Down syndrome.
Great. So we'll see more when you come back to AAIC next year, or ADPD, which of course will be before AAIC. Any thoughts on what causes the microbleed? Why people living with Down syndrome experience more microbleeds in the first place?
Very good question. So people with Down syndrome, from a very young age, they start to accumulate amyloid because of the triplication of the APP gene on chromosome 21. And so amyloid builds up in the small vessels, and we call this cerebral amyloid angiopathy. And when this happens, it causes the vessel walls to become a little bit weaker and a little bit of blood to come out into the brain.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So go check that poster out on the platform, or you'll also see Sara wandering around the conference if you're there in person right now in a purple t-shirt, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Thanks very much. Okay, so let's get on with today's highlights. Of course, the big news, the first big news, which I'm going to introduce when we can all have a little bit of a chat about, was the report from Eli Lilly about the Trailblazer ALS 2 clinical trial of Donemab and how effective this is in early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to read this just so I don't make a mistake. The three main bullet points that they gave away on their press release was that the beneficial treatment effect continued to increase relative to placebo over the course of the trial, with the largest differences versus placebo seen at 18 months. They went on to say that study participants at the earliest stage of the disease had the greater benefit, with 60% slowing of decline compared to placebo, and significant benefits were also seen in advanced patients. I don't know if there were more detail. Obviously, I have to confess I haven't watched all of this talk back, so I'm guessing that there's more detail if you go back and watch this on what they mean by more advanced patients and at what point that kicked in. The third point that they made was nearly half, 47% of study participants at the earliest stage of the disease who received Donemab had no clinical progression at 1 year. So, and the big difference on this drug compared to the other ones that the FDA have approved is that it's the treatment time. So you only take this until amyloid is cleared, and then you stop taking it. Whereas the other ones, I think you continue to take it, is my understanding of this. And 52% of people who took this drug only actually participated for a year. So I'm guessing that it had cleared the amyloid within a year, 72% within 18 months, which of course means that this is potentially significantly cheaper. And of course doesn't have the same pressure. Aoife, you were there in person for some of this. Why don't you tell us what were the nuances? I've given you the headlines that came out of the press release. What have you got to add to that?
First off, it was just really exciting. I don't think I'd ever been in a hall of that size before. And then when the first slide came up of all of the kind of the first top line data, like everyone started applauding, which was very exciting. And what you said there about the coming off of the treatment, I think that's really, really interesting. So they were monitoring the people, they continued to do so. And it was about, I think it was 47 weeks, people were able to come off because they had such a lowering of amyloid. They came off of Donemab, and then they were monitored again. And it was still 76 weeks later from beginning of the trial that they were still, but now off of the drug. So about, 26 weeks later, still had lowering. But then it's what's going to be really interesting is to monitor these people long term and see, does amyloid creep back up again? How often will these people need to be monitored to see, will doses change or will you go back on the drug? But like you said, it's could be cheaper for people then, doses could be changed. I think it does really highlight the importance of being able to measure, and we saw so much about biomarkers over the last 2 days that like if you were able to cheaply actually measure these people, that should go in hand with it.
And that's the tricky thing, is that's what makes some of these things so controversial is because whilst I think there's general agreement that amyloid has no place there and having no amyloid is better than having it, you can also have it but not necessarily have Alzheimer's. So deciding when to treat is the tricky part, I guess, and seeing that clinically impactful differences. But these, I mean, the results are amazing. I was interested in the bit about, so 47% of study participants at the early received no clinical progress. Does anybody have any sense of how that compares to other drugs? I mean, is 47%, because I don't know if that meant that the other 53% did carry on, or they just didn't get as good an effect. And how does 47% effectiveness compare to, you know, is that good? I mean, it's great for this disease when there's nothing at all, nothing else out there. But how does that compare to other treatments? Is that a good stat? I don't really get a sense. Clearly, I'm not making my sense, am I? But you know what I mean. Clearly, it's good. But how good is it compared to other treatments for other diseases?
I don't know the answer exactly to that question, but I think when we see further trials that compare, so these are comparing a new drug against a placebo arm, be fascinating to see the lecanemabs, the donemabs, comparing the new drugs comparing to these ones.
Which we're not going to be too far away from, are you? Particularly if regulators want to decide which one is the most cost effective, they're going to start to compare. So Sara and Sonata, have you got any thoughts on this?
No, except that it's great news.
I think everybody can agree on that.
It's very good to see that I've come into this field at such a good time where all the science is doing exactly what it needs to be doing, working towards a cure.
Yep, I think that's the general consensus, isn't it? That this is good news. I think the challenge now, and we've seen this, I think there was a paper, an opinion piece in the, I want to say the Lancet, but it could have been Alzheimer's Dementia. I know Don Schott and Nick Fox published a piece today from UCL talking about the practical implications now. I mean, because it goes with this treatment there, it's great, but we've potentially got to start using it. And how do we implement something like that? We've got lessons from other diseases. We know that these therapies are delivered in other places, but we've got to learn from that and work how we upscale that, which I know AAIC is also campaigning for right now. You published a report last year, and I see you're working with the Royal College of Psychiatrists for a series of workshops on that challenge.
Yes, and we have a speaker at the conference on Wednesday. So Susan Mitchell, our head of policy, is going to be talking on a panel about system preparedness with a couple of others. The names I'm not familiar with yet, but yeah, that's one to look out for on Wednesday. So how these healthcare systems can get ready in different countries for these new drugs.
Brilliant. Well, that's the big headline takeaway. Congratulations to Eli Lilly for getting through that. And so now let's move on and get some of your highlights. Sonata, why don't you go first? Tell us what you enjoyed most today.
As far as I'm biased with a public patient involvement, so I joined the session on public and patient involvement in dementia research, and I enjoyed it. So there were presented 6 presentations, and they can be grouped into 3 groups, I would say, categorized in 3 groups. So one group was presenting national and very new patient public panels. So there was a project there is a project in Netherlands, a Dutch project abroad, which also launched a PPI panel just a year ago, and there was the presenter explained all the process, how they recruited panelists and how successful they assessed this process as successful. Still, after a year of living of this panel, so they still have 55 panelists, and And also, what is important about maybe to say about this session, that it may be very different from the rest scientific sessions, from the other scientific sessions, because each of these presentations were followed with people from these members of PPIs. So it was very powerful, I would say.
So so this is the patient and public involvement global perspective session that Helen Bundy Mesger chaired, and I think the session you're talking about is the Tanya de Ricci, who's at Amsterdam UMC. So I didn't realize, though, because I have to say I didn't attend this session. So after each of the the kind of reason for doing PPI, a patient or somebody living with the disease spoke after each of them.
Or they were in person participating, like Chris Roberts, for example. For this abort project, there also was a panel member who presented actually what they are doing there and how they find the results, how they find their impact on the project implementation, on the process of all research. And either it could be also videos and it was really very nice videos, short, very informative, but they all in general were like a part of panelists who expressed their thoughts, their experience in participating, and importance of their and understanding and acknowledgement of their role in participation in these panels.
That is great to see, because I think, historically, I don't think AAIC had many people living with dementia or carers actually take to the stage. I mean, they might have done at the start to kind of set the scene, or maybe at the closing parts or some of the fundraising. But to actually have multiple people in an individual session, I think might be the first time that that's done. And whilst PPI is going up the agenda, particularly at this conference, I don't think there's been one that's been given such profile and such a platform on the big stage, which is brilliant. I think Anna Diaz from Alzheimer Europe was at that one, and Ira Leroy from GBHI Trinity, Diana Gove also from Alzheimer Europe. So and Chris Roberts, of course, who's a friend of the show. Chris Roberts, who's been on here a few times before, gave a great talk. I have to say, I did skip in and jump just to watch Chris's bit. So if you haven't seen that yet, do go and have a look. Although I'm a little bit sad to see that on the online platform, the people living with dementia who actually spoke, their names aren't mentioned anywhere in there, and they should be, I think. So go fix that. Well, is there anything else to add to that, Sonata, from that session? What were your main kind of takeaways, other than clearly PPI is important?
What I remember, what I just made, the notes which I made for myself, that the PPI involvement is very important for increasing participation in research, in increasing engagement and trust actually in researchers, in research of people with from target groups and from general public. So it's very important. And also what was mentioned by Chris, by the way, that it's beneficial for both the participation to the researchers and the input and insights they give, but also for those people to communicate with each other. They help to each other, and very important message which he said, that actually when he started to when he was invited to participate in research, he actually had very a lot of doubts, but when he started, he felt that he returned back his confidence. He started to feel valued again, And that is very important for all people who the importance of their lived experience is very important to researchers, but for those people to be acknowledged as an important part of research, also it's very important for their mental health.
And I think all too often we've thought of PPI as being something that's exclusively important to qualitative researchers or clinical researchers because they have to do study recruitment, and having PPI will help study recruitment. And I think we're moving away from that now to think about where the public and people with lived experience can contribute in that fundamental science space as well, how it's important that that they can also be involved in lab-based research, not just things about preventing falls or improving hydration in care homes. Watch this space for a podcast on that topic coming next month. So I think it's great, and I really hope that room wasn't just full of all the care researchers that are attending AAIC, that some of the basic scientists went and watched that as well. So if you're listening to this now and you're at the AAIC or you're just watching online, please do take a moment to go watch the Patient and Public Involvement Dementia Research Global Perspectives session, because I think you really will get something out of it. I think it kind of sometimes, particularly lab-based research, where we know that there's a lot of day-to-day failure, that I think sometimes it's a great way to, if nothing else, to remind you why this is important and why you go into the lab each day, and to have that direct line of sight between your work and the people that will benefit, I think is really important. And so don't just kind of keep your head down in the lab. Do look up once in a while and see the people that are living with dementia, because I think it can be incredibly motivating. Thank you, Sonata. And that's me off my high horse, preaching of the values of PPI. Aoife, why don't I come to you next? What have you seen today that you enjoyed?
I think Donemab was such a big thing, but there was also so many other stuff happening on the conference. And I went to a neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration research session, and there are a few different speakers, and I think what kind of cropped up time and time again was just that treating neuroinflammation would be really important alongside as a co-treatment with some of these disease modifying drugs, and one area that I wasn't very familiar with, but I just found it very interesting, is looking at fibrin, and it's a protein that's involved in coagulation cascades, blood clotting, in case I need to be corrected. But they've shown that this fibrin protein can build up around amyloid plaques. Like there's a deposition of it, but that this group are looking at an immunotherapy that to not target fibrin's role in coagulation, but that it also activates its microglial receptor. And so they're looking at that pathway. I'm just kind of looking at my notes here. But
well, that sounds like a smart solution, isn't it? Because I think there's a general a general agreement that the anti-amyloid therapies alone aren't going to solve this, particularly if you stop and the amyloid comes back. But if you can put some immunotherapy on that as well, although of course that means we need to understand the fundamental cause of what's bringing them there in the first place. Yeah,
exactly. And that the idea is that you could neutralize fibrin as a selective target for regulation a particular microglial function.
Is that still in mouse? Is that in mouse models yet?
So this is actually one to look out for, because it's in phase 1 healthy volunteers to start with.
Wow.
It's called, I have the note, it's a Terini Bio. The researcher's name is Katerina Akasoglu. I'm definitely butchering the surname. But another interesting thing is that it's this blood-brain barrier, and you have blood leaks that could activate microglia. So they're thinking that you could use this. It might increase efficacy and maybe decrease ARIA pathology.
So it could be as like an anti-side effect treatment for something else that's going on.
Possibly. This is all speculative and like potential down the line, but they've definitely got the first stage
clearly progressed if that's onto a phase 1. So I guess they're only just starting that phase 1 trial. There's no results from that yet.
No.
Okay, so definitely one to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aoife. Sara?
Well, it's quite difficult to pick a highlight because I am in that stage where everything is incredibly exciting. However, I have been to quite a few very interesting talks today. But one thing that really stood out to me was the Ask session, actually, with the Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Bruce Miller.
Bruce is brilliant. He's been on the podcast as well before. He's the UCSF and also the lead for the GBHI. And we did a podcast on GBHI a few weeks ago. Tell us about that.
Yes, so, I mean, I do feel like I'm bringing a lot of things together and making some connections, at least in my brain, for how we move forward with Alzheimer's disease. Bruce strikes me as a very big picture guy. I guess that's in the job title of being part of GBHI and having so many years under his belt. There were quite a few questions that he got about all the comorbidities that can come along with Alzheimer's disease. Because, of course, we are talking about people who are getting on in age and have lots of vascular contributions. They may have some Lewy body, they may have Parkinson's. And I found that very interesting, and I really enjoyed, he answered a few questions where he was talking a lot actually about sleep and about exercise and the importance of these two things and trying to mitigate Alzheimer's disease potentially. So very, very interesting talk. And he seems like the sort of person who would be lovely to have a very long conversation with.
I think inspiration for anybody who's thinking about applying for the GBHI fellowship program, which I think is still open right now, that you could find yourself next year at UCSF being taught by Bruce. I completely agree. I think he's a really engaging speaker, and I love that. I mean, the program that is involved with GBHI, in that they involve, you know, artists and musicians and poetry, and he talks about this kind of bigger enrichment picture, and that he does talk about sleep and diet, which, to hear that from a neurologist at that kind of senior stage in their career is quite unusual to have that big picture, you know, and he's a great speaker. I don't think those are, the Ask sessions sadly aren't available online, are they? So you can't go back and watch that. However, Bruce hasn't got a book. I know he's done a book, which we've talked about before on the show. So do go have a look. I'm going to bring up now, I'm going to jump ahead and bring up the other big news today, which is the Alzheimer's, the first ever county level estimates of Alzheimer dementia prevalence were published, which covered all 3,142 United States counties finally had their prevalence data shared. And the study found that east and southeast regions of the US had higher prevalences of Alzheimer's disease. And this is using cognitive data from the Chicago Health and Aging Project, the CHAP project, and population estimates from the National Center for Health Statistics. They also picked on particular counties, and I mean, Miami-Dade County, Baltimore City, Bronx County came out as having the higher prevalences, which can probably be explained because specific demographic characteristics. I think in the UK you'd think that, you know, it'd be the equivalent of Bournemouth and places where older people tended to live and retire to. But the older age and higher percentages also of Black and Hispanic residents in those places where Black and Hispanic residents lived were twice as likely to have Alzheimer's compared to older whites in those places. So that was particularly interesting. Of course, anybody who's listening in the States, that all this data has been published in Alzheimer's and Dementia today. So we'll pop a link to that in the show notes. Did anybody else, I don't know if there was a specific session on this, the one I watched. Did anybody see that? No, nobody's. I won't waste time going through. But this is particularly important. I think in the UK we're quite lucky. There's been prevalence data for quite some time, although more on prevalence rather than incidence, which is really poor. We don't report on incidence at all. You won't get incidence rates in the UK. We don't publish it. So I think it's a great first step, but moving on to incidence rates is going to be important, particularly when you're starting to consider treatments and how many people are going to need this per year and those estimates, because those numbers just don't exist. So that was a hot one today as well. and I'm going to go round again. We've got time. We've probably got time. I'm rubbish at keeping to time on these things. We're already way overrun, but I'm going to do one more round the table and give you a chance. I'm going to go back to you, Aoife, first of all. Aoife, what else do you want to share from today?
I'm going to share something kind of short and sweet because it was a poster presentation that, pardon the pun, caught my eye when I was walking through. It came from a PhD student and it was looking at teardrops as a biomarker for Alzheimer's disease. Yeah,
Tears?
yeah.
Wait,
really
can you imagine
cool.
the process though? You have to make somebody cry. To get...
I know, and this is a whole area I was not aware of. There's a tear research network looking at lots of different diseases. So this student, she works in Maastricht University, so that would be in the Netherlands, and it's pilot data, but they were able to detect like A beta 40, 42, tau, total tau, phospho-tau in the teardrops. And then they're looking at, and they found that the total tau, I'm reading my notes here now, are significantly elevated or higher levels in dementia patients.
Stunned silence from the audience.
Amazing.
Wow. So that's even easier than blood. I mean,
I know.
if that works, why are we bothering with pinpricks and blood? Let's just little sniff of some smelling salts, and you could drop a tear onto a card and get a wow.
Yeah, this would be amazing if it develops into something.
Did they talk about,
bigger.
are there any other diseases we measure through tears?
So
is it
they
already
weren't-
clinically,
yeah.
have we got efficacy somewhere
No,
else?
yeah, it's they were looking, so there's other groups looking at different diseases, but they weren't familiar with them. I'm going to have to do a bit of digging myself.
Okay, we need that poster. Everybody's got to go look at this poster now.
Yeah, and actually I bumped into their colleague and he looks at thickness of the, it was the retinal nerve fiber, and that thickness can change. So they're showing it to be thinner in Alzheimer's disease.
And we have covered this. We talked about this in a
really?
podcast in July. We had
okay.
Sarah so we had somebody from
Baumeister?
No, not that Sarah. We had somebody come and talk about, and I'm really going to annoy you, I'll remember her name, but from Retispec came on. Catherine came on and talked about their retinal eye screening that could be adapted into normal optometrists and can take pictures and can measure amyloid. It's interesting because I don't think that was from the fluid though. That was from the image rather than the fluid. So I guess it makes sense that if you can get it from the fluid, you could get that from the image. That's really interesting. Can you remember the name of the presenter so people can look that up? I'll tell you what, I'm going to move on. I'll let Sara tell her highlights while you look that up, and I'll give you a minute. Sara, back to you.
Well, first thing this morning, 8 a.m., I was attending a talk about 7 Tesla MRI. Quite an interesting topic, actually, although there are not so many 7 Tesla MRI scanners in the world. But yes, as you can imagine, they're very expensive. One thing that really stood out to me, there was a talk at the end about, so they were mostly talking about COVID survivors when they were talking about the 7T MRI that they were looking at. And there was one talk about white matter hyperintensities, which I'm a big fan of, as you can probably tell, in COVID survivors. And something that stood out to me was that she was talking about how 7T could be quite useful in being able to detect more subtle injury in the white matter hyperintensities. So I'm very interested to see all these higher Tesla MRI scanners and all the research that's coming out of it in the next few years.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, more MRI machines. I saw some stats this week that showed about how many MRIs the UK had when we were very behind in other parts of the world. So maybe if we are going to get some new kit, we should get more Teslas. And they're not the kind you drive around and recharge. There was another big plenary today, which sounds like I'm not sure if anybody went to, which was Christian Lasagna Reeves. I don't know if anybody saw that one on bassoon contributes to tau seed propagation and neurotoxicity and the evolving role of complement in Alzheimer's disease. I don't know if anybody saw that. No, that was the other big plenary for today, but we're not going to cover that. Sonata, I'm going to come back to... Oh, wait, Aoife, did you find the name of that speaker while we remember?
Ninka van de Sande is the name of the
Check
researcher.
that out about
PhD
tears.
researcher, yeah.
Sonata.
Okay, I attended one more session on sensory loss and sleep disturbances in persons with dementia and their care partners. Yeah, I'm interested in everything what is related with care partners as far as I'm myself a carer. So there were 2 talks about sleep disturbances in care partners. They were presented to actually both talks presented pilot projects, so it's a very initial stage of research. The samples also were very small, so it's very difficult to do any generalized outcomes of it. The one research had only 7 deaths explored, the other one 30, but the first one didn't have so this is very initial data. It was interesting to hear that the sleep is bad for the caregivers, even if they are separated from their care recipients. So it's very interesting. But I think that still for me as a carer, it's not enough. I'm just looking for something what will be done with these results. Of course, there are needed much bigger and much longer researchers, but of course I'm always thinking what will be done with these results.
I think it's an under researched area, I would imagine, that not because of course we look at sleep all too often in kind of a in that preventative kind of brain health space, don't we, as the importance of sleep for clearing the brain at the end of the day. And it's, you know, we know that it's in the last few years that's been found to be more important than ever, and then looking at that. But I don't think I've come across very much that really looks at the importance of sleep for carers. Because, you know, if you've got the full-time job of looking after somebody living with dementia and you're at home and you have poor sleep, your capabilities to actually care for that person effectively and the risk of you then also going on to develop the disease are particularly relevant. Is this the talk you're talking about? Is this the Yusu song from VA Greater Los Angeles?
Yes, this is the second one, and there is Mike Quick, I guess. So also from
Mark Quigg from University of Virginia, quantifying carer sleep disturbances using dynamic models.
It was interesting. It was catching, but still very underdeveloped. But I can really confirm that that is a problem when you are an intensive carer.
So many carer issues are overlooked, aren't they? Or dealt with in a separate space that don't consider them to be dementia research, whereas actually the impact on carers is probably more significant than the person living with dementia themselves at that stage. So more research on this, please, I think is the takeaway message, I'd say. Do you know what? I'm going to give anybody else. Is there anything else burning? We've burnt through our time. Are there any burning talks that you wanted to talk about that I didn't give you a chance to? No, good. In that case, there is one last one. I'm going to hold this up. For those who are watching on YouTube, you can see this. The poster I'm going to talk about next looks like this. And I'm going to mention this because I'm one of the co-authors on it. It's Diana Karmakowska, who is a colleague of mine who we both collaborated on the ISTAART PIA to elevate early career researchers, and there's been a piece of work going on for quite some time now, but it's finally got this poster which compared the G20 countries for how they support early career researchers and how early career researchers are or are not mentioned in their particular dementia strategies. You'd be pleased to know the US and UK did particularly well, but it compares all the countries from G20 to see what support they had for ECRs. Probably no surprise to see that there were lots of countries didn't have any mention whatsoever of support for ECRs. I mean, they do provide funding for research, but they're not specifically mentioned as a group of people that need extra support or mentoring, or there's certainly nothing in their national strategies, which I think is a real missed opportunity, given that they're the people that are driving these discoveries. So if you don't support the careers of researchers, how are they ever even going to be there to take advantage of the funding that you make available? So it's a great poster. Do have a look online. It's Diana Karamakowska, which is Koska. Or I think my name's on there as well, so you could look for Adam Smith. It might still bring it up. So yeah, a little plug for our poster there. And if you're not already a member of the ISTAART PIA to elevate early career researchers, go join, because you get the opportunity to be involved in great work like that. And there were lots of other people on that, which I'm not going to mention all the names, but Pascal Hines, Rita. I'm not going to mention them. There were lots of other people. Great poster. Phew! Right. We're going to have one last little segment where I'm going to talk to Sara about her work, because I've no idea how she's actually found time to talk about anything today, because she's also an ISTAART volunteer. So let's just ask a few questions about that. So, Sara, you're not still wearing your purple T-shirt, but you're one of the people who've been running around at the conference wearing one, because you're a ISTAART ambassador. What is that? What's that mean?
Well, it's actually very exciting. I'm so happy to have been given this opportunity. So I am currently working with a whole cohort of ambassadors for this year until mid next year. And so mainly our roles here have been to make sure that everything runs as smoothly as it possibly can. So if you've been at the conference, you've probably been able to see people in purple shirts running around quite a bit. And we've also been in all of the talks trying to make sure that the speakers know what they're doing, and that we can help with the AV team to make sure that everything has been running as smoothly as possible. And yeah, it's been wonderful. The other ambassadors have been so lovely to work with.
How many of you are there?
I believe it's 25. I could be wrong about that.
So this is 25. Anybody can apply for this, and the application is usually open toward the start of the year, and then you get to go to the AAIC. They cover all the costs of that, and it doesn't preclude you from presenting either, because you, as you say, you've got posters. I guess you don't necessarily get to go to every session you might want to see, because you go to wherever you go.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, I was not able to attend in person the Donemab today because I had other things that I needed to go and get done. But we do get a choice to go to specific sessions.
Perfect. So if there's one that's really for your research field, you could state a preference as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So, this, of course, is just the start, because you have the whole year then where there are other events, and I know that they provide extra training and sessions for you all, and so I guess you're going to find all that out over the coming year.
Yes, and we're very active on social media at the moment. Anywhere where there's the hashtag AAIC23, you'll be able to see somebody who is a purple shirt. And yeah, I'm very excited to see where the rest of the year takes us.
Great. So I've given Sara a chance to plug her thing. Aoife, is there anything going on at AI? You've got a big reception. I'm not sure when this podcast will come out. It's either going to come out today or tomorrow morning, but which is still plenty of time to sign up. If you're in if you're in Amsterdam right now, you could. Is there still places on your reception?
The networking reception is with places think we're at full capacity now.
Okay. I shouldn't have mentioned that then, shouldn't I?
But
Just turn up. Just go.
we can see-
Knock on the door. Say you know Aoife, and Aoife said it was okay, and they'll let you in. Is there free wine? I assume there's wine.
Yes, and nibbles, and it's with it's with the Alzheimer's Society, the Dementia Research Institute, and the Dementia Platforms UK. So we're all co-hosting a networking event, but it's actually
incredibly irresponsible of me to just say go. But have a look in your Twitter. You could always fill in the form. You never know; there might be a wait list.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I just yesterday seeing thousands of people. I think if anyone gets the chance to go to one of these kind of smaller offshoot events, it's just that little bit of a smaller crowd. You might get to chat to more people and not as overwhelming as the big thousands that arrived yesterday.
I completely agree. I think one of my best bits, I'm not at the AAIC in person this year, but one of my favourite bits is the kind of socialising and the networking, and that's where so much of the connections and things that we've made, so many podcast guests and people who've contributed to dementia research over the years have come from chance conversations in a bar or at a reception after the AAIC, so do take the chance to go look at those. Sonata, have you got anything lined up for the rest of the week? Is there anything particular that you're going to be looking forward to on the rest of the conference?
Yes, tomorrow I guess it's more like a dementia care practice session, so I will I will be tuned for half of a day at least, and spend next to my computer.
Brilliant. Well, do you know what? I also didn't acknowledge, I imagine it's quite late in Lithuania right now, so I'm really sorry if I've kept you up. Yes. And I know it's getting on past 10 o'clock in the night in the Netherlands as well, and I'm keeping you both from the bar, I imagine. So I'm going to wrap things up there. Thank you so much to my incredible guests, Sára Erzsebet Zsadányi, Dr. Aoife Cosgrave, and Sonata Mačiulskytė, for all your amazing contributions and for sharing your highlights with us today. We're going to be back tomorrow with day 3, and tune in. I'm Adam Smith, and you've been listening to the Dementia Researcher podcast.
The Dementia Researcher podcast was brought to you by University College London with generous funding from the UK National Institute for Health Research, Alzheimer's Research UK, Alzheimer's Society, Alzheimer's Association, and Race Against Dementia. Please subscribe, leave us a review, and register on our website for full access to all our great resources. dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk